Well, my friend, it is an honor to sit down virtually from across the world with you today. Uh, how's the life in the UK? What's the weather like? Let's get the small talk out of the way, but I'm actually
Y-
curious. Is it raining?
Yeah, no, Adam, lovely to connect. It is the most beautiful day. It's about high 20s. So we love to complain about the weather here in the UK, and now everyone's complaining it's too hot, but it's absolutely glorious.
Yeah, does it actually get like in America, like where I'm at in Ohio, it can get like Sunday is gonna be 95 out. Like,
Yeah, very unlike. I mean, anything over 30 here, I tend to think in that. So 28 is 82. That's the
yep,
one I remember.
yep.
So yeah, we'll get over 30 actually. It could get to 30, 33, 30, 34, but that's pretty rare. Although the headlines today are in the newspapers are always all talking about how the UK's got to get used to temperatures of 45 degrees centigrade in a few years, which I think again is just the UK getting totally carried away about weather.
Well, that's one thing that all of us, no matter what part of the world we're from, we love
Yeah,
to complain about our current
yeah,
situation.
exactly.
Well, I think a good place to start is at the beginning. I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and where you're from and how you got to the position that you're in today.
Yeah, yeah. So let me start on that. I mean, the position I hold today is chair of a charity which we'll talk about, which is called Equipping Pastors Worldwide, and we'll come back to that. But myself, I'm a half English, half Australian. My mum was Australian. Funnily enough, I grew up in southern India. My dad worked in southern India, so I grew up there till I was about 10. Then we moved back to the UK. I'm one of three brothers, actually, schooled and university in the UK. Then I moved to work in first Hong Kong and Singapore. Actually, I have a deep love of Asia
Mm.
and Africa, but more of my working life has been spent in Asia. Actually, I my mum was a Christian, and I went to a Christian school, but none of it really made sense when I was a teenager. I would sit through endless services and be pretty zoned out. But I sort of came to faith shortly after I married my wife, Trisha, who's also English, when we were living in Singapore, actually.
Mm.
So we went to a church in Singapore. I went to one of these Alpha courses and came to faith sort of around 30, actually.
Okay.
And then we were blessed with three kids, moved back to the UK, and worked full time in the sort of legal and finance industries till 2021, actually, based in the UK, actually, which was fantastic. And then since then, I sort of work three and a half days a week, I guess, and in various roles, but supporting four or five small Christian charities,
Okay.
one of which is Equipping Pastors Worldwide. And then my other passion is sport. So I work for a couple of sporting charities in the UK. And then I am an elder. Trish and I attend a medium-sized independent evangelical independent church in the south in the UK here, and I'm an elder and one of the sort of leadership team there. So yeah, that's how I spend my time at the moment, which is wonderful. I feel very blessed
Yeah.
by the Lord to be able to do that actually. And if I was going back in time, 5 or 10 years, I probably wouldn't have seen where I was today. But that's often the case, I guess.
It is amazing how we just kind of discover our calling. We wake up right in the middle of it. Everybody's like,
Yes,
pursue it, but it seems like literally the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. You just, as you obey and flow with Him, you just arrive there.
yeah, exactly. And then you look back in time, and you can
Yeah,
see the steps He has been taking with and for you. Actually,
yeah, I love it. And it's all the life experiences that like building blocks to build up to where you are. And it's like
yeah,
sometimes, would you go back and change anything that happened? And I'm like, I don't think so.
yeah,
Obviously we can't. It's not possible. It's theoretical, but really, all things work together for the good for those who love God and are called according to His purpose. That's
yes,
a real thing to experience in life.
yeah. I agree. So it's marvelous, actually. So yeah, no, it's fantastic.
Yeah. So real quick before we talk about what you're involved in now, which is an amazing thing, when you came to the Lord in your early 30s, what was your conversion experience like? How did that kind of fall into place?
Interestingly, I had a long, I call it a gestation period.
Mhm.
So I didn't realize this at the time, but I was in the UK at a all boys boarding school, which I really enjoyed actually. But there was a chap who's actually a well known evangelist now, Rico Tice, who was at school with me, who's quite a well known evangelist. And he came to faith when his godfather died as a 16-year-old at the same school.
Okay.
I always observed him. I didn't know him very well at that stage. I always observed him because he was, he took a lot of what we would call flack for that from a load of the boys in our year. But I always remember, funnily enough, seeing him and thinking, gosh, there's something slightly different about this guy. He can sort of let it wash over him. And, certainly on the surface, it was fine to take all this stuff. Didn't change him, didn't change his views.
Yeah.
And the Lord had blessed him. It sounds very stupid, this, but the Lord had blessed him with being a fabulous sportsman.
Mm-hmm.
And at that school, an all-boys school, being a sportsman was a real plus. So he had that to help him as well. But I always remember seeing him and thinking, and so the reason I mention that is, I think over the years to come, and I was very lucky to meet Trish, who was a Christian, my wife. Over the years to come, I think this was at the back of my mind. And then having met Trish, she urged me to sort of make a decision for myself. So I would be on the fence. Do I really believe or not? And obviously, the Lord will decide for you when He opens your eyes.
Yeah.
But she suggested I went on an Alpha course and said, "Come on, you've really got to make your own decision here." And also, funnily enough, Rico Tice was actually, as part of his Christianity Explored worldwide mission, came to speak in Singapore where we were. So I sort of met him, and then it was at that Alpha course, actually, at this church, St. George's Tangling in Singapore, where I just came to realize, I think, who Christ really was and is, and what He has done for me and millions of others. And it was that realization at that, which I think, had probably been at the back of my mind, or had been sort of, it wasn't so it was one of those longer term ones. I'm not one of these people who experienced a very, very dramatic conversion event. I suspect the majority, I don't know, would be more like me, where in many cases it's taken some time, actually.
Sure.
But no, so that was when I was early 30s. And then I think, funnily enough, over the last 10 years, I think my journey with Christ has become deeper. So even when I was working full time in the banking industry, partly for family reasons, but I took a 6-month sabbatical to help look after one of the kids. But also, I went on a sort of Bible course for 6 months, one day a week, which sounds very basic, but teaching me how to read the Bible well.
Yeah.
And so it's all those sort of things when I look back on, and the Lord gave me that time and opportunity. And so I feel over the last 10 years or so that it's obviously a journey, isn't it? And we are never, ever the complete article. But I feel there, for me personally, there's been a sort of a deepening of my understanding and love for Christ over that period. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I grew up in church, so people ask me when I got saved, and I remember being 4 years old and crying one night after church, sitting on our fireplace mantle, and just realizing that I was a sinner, needed a savior as just a heathenistic 4-year-old.
Yeah.
The growing up and the developing of your faith and how the relationship with the Lord builds, and then you get to know Him, and then you know His heart.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you want to carry the burden of His heart, which is to reach the lost.
Yeah.
And to give Him the reward of His suffering, which is to bring people to Himself. And so when did that moment happen for you? When did you go from just trying to discover your faith and get to know him, to really feeling the call of God on your life to serve him in the capacity that you are now?
Yeah, I would say that's really actually to serve in that respect. Probably 6, 7 years ago, actually, as I was sort of thinking about moving from out of the banking and finance sector, which probably it culminated in 2021, but probably was again a few years at the back of my mind before that. And then I had no plans at the end of that, actually, but I started reaching out to a number of people, particularly those who I knew with a faith. And funnily enough, I think those sort of and I've also, what's been interesting, so a lot of doors have been opened on that front in terms of supporting various ministries, along with my local church engagement, but supporting many ministries. A lot of doors have opened. But equally, and this has been, funnily enough, I was to say this is a really good thing, although people never believe me, is that a lot of doors have been shut. So I have a particular passion for certain sports, and I've applied for various roles there, and those doors have been firmly shut for me. And you know, I've having had a period for sort of 20 or 30 years when I was working full time, where you didn't get many rejections at all. You were doing quite well in your secular, doing well. To suddenly, and at first I took umbrage on that and got slightly, but then I realised actually, those roles I was probably applying for were, as Tricia would say, were really just to satisfy yourself. You have a passion, you enjoy it, and I'm not saying that's wrong at all.
Sure.
But it's just interesting to me that those types of, more of those doors were shut than were opened.
Yeah.
Which again, when you look back on it, is very interesting.
Yeah, that's a closed door is a redirection. It's
yes,
it's not a denial or anything, but it's like good, better, best almost, and we want the best of what God has for us, I think, rather than
So I think over the last sort of 5 years or so, that's really grown, that desire to whatever skills and experience I have to sort of, and time actually, to devote to supporting ministries which I feel passionate about. So that's really, grown a lot over the last 5 years, I suspect.
That's amazing. So that probably leads us to a good segue to talk about EPW, what your role is in that. And I really kind of want to get behind the heart of that organization and find out exactly what God has mandated you to do. How we can possibly help.
So let me talk to that. So since I've been the chair of this organization, Equipping Pastors Worldwide, for probably coming up for 2 years. The organization was started around 20 years ago in the UK, and it's an amalgamation of two smaller charities. One was called Pastor Training International, and one was called Christian Books Worldwide. And they both sought to serve pastors in what I guess people call the majority world. So for us, let's simplify that as being really Africa and Asia. So the heart of the organization, when it was the organizations, as it was said, they were set up about 20 years ago, was to serve pastors who had very limited, if any, resources in these countries. And that was predominantly by providing access to free, biblically faithful books, either secondhand books or new books. And then secondly, Pastors Training International provided on-the-ground training to pastors in various countries. Those two charities were merged. I joined Christian Books Worldwide in 2020. I can't remember when, 21, I think.
Okay.
And then took over as chair of the merged entity about 18 months ago. So they've been brought together under one charity, Equipping Pastors Worldwide. And we're a small organization based in the UK, very reliant on a small number of staff, but then many, many volunteers, both on the ground in the UK and also in various countries, which I'll talk about actually. But the heart of the organization continues to be to try and serve under-resourced pastors in those two continents, Asia and Africa. And again, we do that to two things. One, we provide on-the-ground training in probably this year, we're probably in 18 countries, I think. So our standard training, if you like, is focused on helping pastors to preach faithfully from the Bible. It's not so much theological training, but it is helping them to and giving them techniques and a heart for opening the Bible and being able to preach faithfully the main messages coming out of those Bible passages. So expository preaching, which you'll know all about. That's our core. The on-the-ground training is basically, we call it 6 steps. Each step is 3, 4, 5 days face-to-face in the country where we are training. And we do that over 3 years, so 2 steps per year generally. And within that training, focus on expository teaching, but also some very important training about what a Christian is, some basic stuff, what a Christian is, pastoral issues to think about. So it's broader than just expository preaching, but it's also trying to work on a pastor's heart for that. And then the sort of resources side of what we provide is we will provide basically books, and increasingly we're having to think about other forms of resources to pastors, not just in those countries where we train, but across a large number of countries, 30 or so across the world, where pastors will engage with us, and we ask for help. And if we think that those pastors are aligned with who we're trying to help, then we will provide them with books. And we have 2 sort of basic collections. One is a sort of pastor's toolbox, and one is a preacher's collection, we call them. So they're collections of 15, or in one case 8 books, which we provide to pastors in 2 or 3 chunks to enable them to have faithful Bible resources, actually. So that's really what we do. That's our heart. We've recently sort of gone out to and done, it sounds very grand, but it isn't, a sort of review of whether that's still whether that is still the right focus. That's the focus God wants us to take forward. And so we got a lot of feedback from the pastors we support and all our other stakeholders, whether they're publishers we work with, and I'll come on to this in a minute. But the overwhelming feedback was, your areas of focus are right. The need is absolutely enormous. Wow. And growing, and I'll come on to that actually. And so that was very reassuring, very humbling as well, because we can't do that. We're never going to be able to do all of this. But we did feel, I guess, that the Lord was, having prayed a lot about it, the Lord seems to want us to continue down this road, all with a view to the gospel being preached faithfully in the countries, and more people coming to know what I would call the true gospel of Jesus. So that is ultimately our desire for kingdom growth.
I think in the Western world, we take for granted the amount of resources that we have to learn and to train, and even the education structure that we have naturally to learn to be able to read.
Yes.
I know a lot of these places. My mom runs an orphanage in Nairobi, Kenya.
Yes.
So does a lot of missionary work in the Maasai. So they're constantly, preaching and then placing pastors, and those pastors don't have anybody to really pour into them. And I believe that, every Timothy needs a Paul.
Yeah.
There has to be some sort of mentorship in place to really build that foundation to where people are actually preaching not out of emotion or faith, but actually out of the word of God, which is the foundation for all our lives. And what an opportunity, but it can seem in the natural very daunting and overwhelming because the need is so great. because every we can go preach mass crusades and we can get
Yeah.
people to raise their hand to get saved, but then what happens the next week? What happens?
Yeah.
There has to be pastors put in place to take care of these people and to shepherd these people.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading a great line actually from some of the old missionaries. I've forgotten who it was. It was someone like C.T. Studd or someone writing to someone in the end of the 19th century. And it was exactly that. Basically, the line was, and I wouldn't necessarily agree with it, but it was one of a missionary to another saying basically, the easy bit is converting people. The hard bit is what happens after that.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't think I would agree with the first bit either. I think that's quite hard as well. But the point being, what happens after is so, particularly in these countries that we're seeking to serve in. I mean, I quite often get asked the question, which is a fair one. If you look before we talk about sort of making this a bit more personal, but a lot of people say, look, we hear that, but isn't Africa in particular the heart of Christianity as you look forward? And I sort of think if you look at the stats and some of the research coming out of the Pew research, it's really interesting actually. By 2050, Christianity will no longer be the biggest religion, and we can argue forever and a day about all of the stats, how accurate they are. But by then, Christianity will account for 31%, and then Islam will be 31%. So it will be very, very similar by 2050. And actually, that's driven predominantly by growth in Africa and Asia, where fertility rates are much higher, and a decline not only in fertility rates, but in religious affiliation, if that's the right word, in the West, as we know, particularly in Europe, more so in Europe, but also in the States, but particularly in Europe, I think the decline of Christianity is greater at the moment than anywhere else. And then within that, the projection is that 4 out of every 10 Christians will be in sub-Saharan Africa. So people always ask me, well, I get that. I get, what you're saying, Richard, but isn't Africa well placed anyway? Look at the growth in Christianity there.
Mm.
And the answer I would give, and I always give, is one has to be really careful on that, because the gospel in many places, but particularly in the majority world, is incredibly fragile.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that in many, many places, false gospels are being preached, so particularly the prosperity gospel. And there is a desperate need to preach and share the true gospel of Christ as we move forward. So it is an ever increasing problem, I think, and so I think it's just important to remember that as we sort of talk about these issues. Actually,
yeah, and if we think about the crowds of people, the amount of people that have yet to hear the gospel preached in a way that's real. I mean, like to your point about the prosperity preachers, I've seen some things online where it's just more of a fleecing of the people.
Oh yeah. There's some wealthy guys, some of those guys.
Yeah, and it's almost because they've seen the corruption that's taken place in their governments, and they've kind of mirrored that, sought that power and that authority, and realized they can use the message of the gospel, the Bible, to try to persuade people that if they do this, this, and this, then they too can have stability and success. And coming from a place of poverty to a place of abundance, that's in the natural. That's the idea.
It's very attractive, isn't it?
Yeah, especially when you grew up in that abject poverty. I mean, I've heard stories for days.
It's an easy emotion to pull. I mean, the other stat that always helps people focus their minds, and again, recognizing you can always debate whether they're fully accurate, but in the majority world, or is it sub-Saharan Africa, one or the other, the estimates are that there are less than 10% of pastors have any training.
Wow.
So if you do the numbers, that's about one trained pastor for about 450,000 Christians, I think. The number in the US, I must find the number in the UK actually, is approximately one trained pastor for 230 people. Wow. So again, let's agree that there could be some difference but the magnitude is just vastly different. So
Yeah.
If that's a thing that helps people, sort of a bit of an eye opener. It's always been a bit of an eye opener for me, that, because I think, picking up on your point earlier, when I'm talking to pastors, and I'm not a pastor, but when I talk to pastors, perhaps in the UK or in the US, I always ask them, so tell me about your education and, the church you pastor, how you prepare your Sunday sermons, your other sermons, where you sit down and write that. And your typical answer will be, and I'm generalizing here, so forgive me for anyone who might listen to this and disagree, but your typical answer is, yes, I went to school, I went to college, I went to university. I know we talk in a slightly different language in the US and the UK. I went to theological college or seminary for 3-4 years. I acted then I joined a church. I was a curate or an assistant for a while. Now I'm pastoring a church. I live in a house, and either the house or the church building itself may have an office or a room, and within that I have books. I have a number of bookshelves with ample resources, many different Bibles. I have the internet. I have my pastor WhatsApp group supporting me. And then I will take them to an example of Malawi, which is each country is different in Africa and Asia, and they're different within each country. But Malawi is at the more under-resourced level. But there, when I ask a pastor, what his life is like and how he prepares for a Sunday sermon, he will be typically working in the fields 6 days a week to grow enough food for him and his family to survive in southern Malawi, and then pastor for another day, walk 5 or 10 kilometers to his church building, possibly been to secondary school, certainly been no further, sometimes not necessarily been to secondary school, certainly not to been above that, sort of college or university. Won't really have internet, easy internet accessibility, won't have any books, may not have a Chichewa Bible, may not have a Bible, and we're expecting people to preach from the Bible. Wow. And he will spend some time trying to think about the message for Sunday. There will be a television where he lives, or in the rural area he lives, and so he may turn the television on, and sometimes there are Christians preaching on the television. If there are, they would be prosperity gospel preachers. So Pastor X would sort of essentially regurgitate a little bit of what he hears on the TV and hears from other, and all in a well-meaning, I'm not saying intentionally, but that's the situation of a number of pastors in southern Malawi, for example. And so if one wants an honest contrast of the situation, that's an extreme one, but not an abnormal one, actually. Wow. And so, it's that's clearly really difficult, isn't it? And something we would love to see change, even to a small degree.
How do you guys connect to the pastors? How do you find the pastor groups to help to begin to pour those resources?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, it varies by country, but we basically have my own view on this is that we need to be working more in partnership with people. We're a small little charity, but sure. To cut to the quick, we train in about 17 countries this year, I think, or over a 3-year period. We have what we call hubs. Okay. In 5 or 6 of those countries. So established relationships with godly men. Normally the relationship is with a church there, or but with 1 or 2 key individuals. So we have hubs in Uganda, Kampala, Nigeria, Zomba in Malawi, a new one in South Africa, and one in southern India, in Madurai. Yeah. And so we would basically, the identifying the pastors to be trained we basically, the guys on the ground there are sort of hub partners. So a marvelous man called Jostra in Malawi, he would arrange that, and yeah. So, and then when we are, we would normally in the other countries we are training in, again, we wouldn't have a sort of permanent hub, but we would be looking to people we trust on the ground there to arrange the logistics and identify the right pastors. And again, that's that in and of itself is a challenge actually. But you get an amazing. I mean, I just had a text from Dave Holt. I don't know if you've met him. Who's our head of training. Who's just an amazing man who's out training in South Africa at the moment. And he texted me last night saying that rather unbelievably, or not unbelievably, the latest cohort in South Africa that him and our partners are training includes a leader of a church who's a witch doctor. And so, you can imagine the spiritual battle and warfare going on there. So, we come with our own preconceptions from the West, but sometimes they're just so far off, actually. So, marvelous. We trust in the Lord and the Holy Spirit for being able to melt anyone's heart, don't we? But yeah, so we are reliant on our local partners there and the Lord leading the right people at the right time to those training sessions.
Wow. I think it's amazing too to be able to go into these areas as missionaries have been faithfully doing for so long and preaching the gospel, but then the people there not only getting born again, but feeling the call of God on their life to proclaim the message to others.
Yes.
Natural. This happened to me. I need to tell somebody else about it, which is
amazing, isn't it?
The seed that was planted, like that urgency behind. We need to go and preach the gospel, like that Great Commission. Even if you've not read the scripture yet or had that understanding how that seed is birthed into their heart to proclaim that. And if God had planted that seed in their life, then it's really an opportunity for us to be able to faithfully nurture that and cover that seed so it doesn't get scooped up and flown away.
Yeah, exactly. And the other seed, the parable of the seeds, to
grow up into a harvest because it's going to reproduce of the kind.
I mean, the other thing where you just which is again just to make it more personal for people is, and again, we shouldn't underestimate the impact on pastors' lives. So we've had a few pastors, I think, in our Nigerian training, who've basically said at the end, I've been a pastor for X years, 30 years or something. How come this is the first time I've really heard about this, and I need to go away and reevaluate. I've reevaluated my life. I'm repenting. I've been preaching the wrong gospel for 30 years, and that's wonderful. But we've just also got to remember here and pray for these men, because that's an incredibly difficult thing to then go back to your community as the pastor, and basically turn the message on its head. And I think there's a very prayerful need to pray, isn't there, in that situation? Because it's all well and good us saying, oh great, this pastor's repented and seen the error of his ways, etc. But there's then a very, very personal impact, obviously a marvelous one because they've truly found Christ, but in their community, having been a pastor for 20 years in a community preaching X, Y, and Z, to go away for a week and come back. So, and again, the reason I mention that is I'm guilty of just when I'm at these events, I don't go as often as Dave or these training sessions, and it's very easy just to go away and say, isn't that wonderful? That people have seen the true and heard, and it's gone into their hearts, the true gospel. But there is then the cost to them, which probably we don't see or experience as much in our own lives. I mean, I'll say definitely not for me.
Wow. Too. So I grew up, obviously, I told you my great grandfather was a pastor. My dad and mom are both in the ministry. And there's a part of pastoring that is not often talked about, which I think these men that feel the call of God in their life in those areas and that are learning to read the scripture and learning the foundation of truth, But then once the proclamation of that truth is heard by the congregation of those places, they're still in the right in the middle of life. They're still dealing with
Yeah.
life struggles. So there becomes a shepherding, or as my dad likes to call it, a parent. He
Yeah.
pastors a church in Northeast Ohio, and he literally has hundreds of children that he's raising in the faith, if you will, and that life cycle of circumstances that are happening in each individual's person, whether that's sickness or financial struggle or hopelessness or whatever the case may be. It's a constant onslaught of really
Yeah.
a shepherd of these people. Does the training also include like the practical aspects of like how to deal with people in your like how to deal with the people in front of you? I mean, after the
Yeah.
message
That's
is shouted
yeah.
amen to, I mean, people still got issues and they go home to. So I think that's an opportunity as well. But
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, actually. And if I'm being honest, I'm just trying to think of the curriculum now, less so. And I think, again, as one looks forward, the risk, one of the risks with how we currently serve is that there's quite a long period between each training, every, say they're every 6 months. So we don't do as good a job as we would love to, or at sort of it goes to your earlier point, I think the sort of support aspect for these men on an ongoing basis. And we're very reliant on our local hub leaders for that.
yeah,
But it is difficult. But I think it is really important, and it's a subset of what you're talking about, actually, which is just that ongoing
yeah,
support and a network. Or I've never been a pastor full time, or a sort of network of people to discuss and share, trusted people to share with, actually, and pray with, because as you say, the life of a pastor is not an easy one when dealing with people, and people aren't easy. So I think there's definitely something more we need to think about there, and in terms of, and again, some of it's logistical, in these very rural communities where there isn't a great connection with mobiles or internet, but that's no excuse. But I do think there's a growing need there, actually. So that's an area we need to put some more thought and prayer into, actually, because
I think for so long, and especially in the West, in the church in the West, we instead of shepherding, we started
counting, as in the numbers.
counting numbers,
Yeah.
and how many people got saved this year, and how many people we reached this year, and but like just counting numbers is not winning. That's not what God called us to do, but it's to really pour the gospel into people, which is for their whole life. Obviously,
Yeah.
we want people to receive Christ, and so their eternal life is secure. But then we still have to live life, and so many people fail during the life process because life is not easy.
Yeah.
If you don't have that connectivity to a congregation of believers who can
Yeah.
strengthen
Yeah. I'm
or
an elder of our church locally, and I'm always rather humbled, and that I can't remember whether it's in Timothy or something, that the duty is the wrong word, but to shepherd as a group of elders under the chief shepherd. And
yeah,
then at the end of the book of James, to bring back anyone who's in danger of walking away from the gospel. There is that's a, and that's right. We should be charged with that, but
yeah.
it's very, very hard to do at the best of times. It's even harder to do if one is on one's own, I suspect.
Yeah, I think so many people that felt the call of God to win the nations and to preach all over the world wanted those numbers. But I always look at the example that Jesus showed us, and we were to really look at his life and what he found important, what he prioritized, and make that our priority.
Mm.
We follow him, and I love the story. After he raises from the dead, he could have gone to any arena and
Mm.
presented himself as the risen Savior, and could have gone and preached to the masses. But he ended up going to find a couple of guys
Yeah, on the rest. Yeah. And sure, yeah. And revealing himself to them. Two
Slow,
guys.
not even all at once. It was a process, right? And then finally they realized. But to what I think that proves to us, it's about God. How can I be effective toward your heart in my life, and whether that's just pouring into this one person right now,
Mm.
taking the little that I have and to use it for you, to give it to you, just like that little boy did that day when everybody was hungry. I think with every crowd, there's always a boy in the audience with some food in his pocket that
Yeah.
help. And once we give that moment of obedience to the Lord, rather not expecting the recognition and the applause of man, and to have so many numbers and accolades on our resume, but just to have obedience be our goal and to be faithful and not care who gets the credit for it,
Yes.
that's when God can use us to do more than we could ever imagine. Because
Yes.
he's not looking for our talent, he's looking for our heart.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
The whole message of the Bible is the heart, isn't it? Or not the
yeah,
whole. So much is about the heart.
it's
And
we make it really complicated, but it's really simple. Love God with all your heart, and then
with all
love
the heart.
the
So,
next, love your neighbor.
yeah. Yeah. I agree. So that's the work of EPW. I mean, it would be marvelous if, yeah, I would, ask for anyone listening to this, your prayers for these men in Africa and Asia. Pray for them. Pray for more men to have access to faithful resources and the heart and the tools and the desire to faithfully preach the word, the true gospel.
Yeah,
Pray for them. And honestly, we talked a little bit about numbers there. Actually, so when now you say it, I mean, we're not doing this because of numbers, but just imagine the impact of this, of 10 pastors suddenly preaching the true gospel. How many more people will hear that
yeah,
over the next 1, 2, 3 years? How they respond is in the Lord's know-how and in their own hearts and minds. But just on the message going out, the true message, it will make a huge difference, actually.
yeah,
And so, yeah, please pray urgently for that. Pray for these men, pray for these ministries, EPW and other ministries who are seeking to serve in this area. And of them, there are many. But please be praying for us and our leadership so that we remain faithful
yeah.
to the Lord in this. And yeah, there are other opportunities to support financially. Have a look at the website there. And yeah, we would, but I think prayer would be marvelous, actually, and we would very, very much value that. We do send out a monthly prayer. It's sort of an update on our work and a prayer newsletter, which is terrific, actually. A colleague of ours, Susan, does that, and it's wonderful. It has lots of personal stories, updating on the training, updating on the books, some of the feedback we get when a pastor, gets a book, and it's just marvelous for them for years, actually, which is always a wonderful thing to hear. And specific prayer requests. And then we do put out, for certain countries, we do put out a regular, more detailed sort of newsletter on what's going on, what we're seeing and what we're doing in various countries like Uganda and Malawi, where if people have a heart for particular countries, that's always a good resource for them as well, actually.
That's amazing. And I pray, even if us over on the west side of the world, if we can't go, many people can't leave their life to go somewhere and to be physically around these men to support them and to pray and to help. But we
Yeah.
can do something. All of us have something
Yes.
that we can give. And
Yes.
that's it's not a desperation plea, it's an opportunity.
No, exactly. Fulfill. Yeah. Don't think. That's a good point. I should have made that. The vast majority of listeners probably won't go to Malawi or Uganda, and I get that, but we all have a role to play, actually,
Yeah.
in our own small ways, actually, in different ways. And again, it's somewhat different. But this old missionary C.T. Studd, who I respect deeply, but he had a most amazing wife. But so he spent, I think, sort of 10 years in China, then 6 years in India, and then 18 years in Belgian Congo in there. But between India and the Congo, he came back to the UK. Actually worked in the US, I think, for a couple of years. But his wife got very ill and she could never travel again. So they only saw each other once in the last 18 years. But the reason I mention this is, and I know she was clearly his wife, but she was back in the UK and she was the most amazing mission partner without ever having the ability to go to the Congo. She organized, she raised money, she got volunteers involved, she arranged, and this is obviously 150 years ago, but she arranged for the dispatch of everything they needed, medical equipment, whatever it is, books, resources. But the reason I mention it is, she was housebound.
Wow.
And recognizing a different relationship, but she just still had the ability to contribute in a massive but unseen way from anyone on the front. They would never have heard of Mrs. Studd sitting in London, but my word, those people benefited because of what she was providing to the front line in those days, missionaries. So don't underestimate, what we can all do, actually.
All do. There's no small gifts in the hand of God.
Yeah, exactly. So exactly.
I love it. Well, I'll definitely make sure we have all the links and stuff to your organization in the.
Yeah, that would be great.
Just encourage everybody that's listening to this to share that do us the honor to share this with your network and help us get word out about this opportunity that we have to pour into these men who are so desperately trying to follow the call of God in their life, and to be able to equip them.
Yeah.
To partner with the heart of God to really show them the way so that they can tell other people the wonderful gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ and see that spread throughout the world. Thank
you, Adam, and thank you to anyone listening to this.
Well, my friend, you're welcome. What an awesome privilege to meet you. For real, this will not be the last time we speak, my friend.
My pleasure. We'll be in touch.
All right, my friend. We'll talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.